In the dusty outposts of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, a quiet intelligence analyst was about to face her greatest test. What started as a routine convoy escort took a shocking turn when they came face to face with a perfectly orchestrated ambush. Specialist Elena Elle Marquez wasn't your typical desk-bound analyst. For 2 years, she had spent her life deliberately hiding in the shadows of conventional forces, known for her uncanny ability to spot patterns others missed, and her unnerving calm under pressure. When they encountered enemy fire raining down from the ridgelines, she had no idea she was about to shatter every assumption her squad had made about her. Elle's split-second decision to coordinate close air support that would lead to a revelation that changed everything. What began as a mission to prove she could blend in would become a masterclass in quiet leadership. The hardened soldiers of 3rd Squad would never be the same, after discovering that the woman they'd dismissed as weak was actually one of the Army's most decorated special operations veterans. Sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who choose to serve in silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dust hadn't even settled from the Blackhawk's rotor wash when Specialist Elena Marquez felt the weight of a dozen stares. She shouldered her duffel bag and walked across the landing zone of Forward Operating Base Sentinel, her boots crunching on the hard-packed Afghan soil. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but it wasn't the heat that made her shoulders tense. It was the obvious assessment happening from every direction. "Great, another intel weenie," someone muttered from behind a concrete barrier. The voice carried just far enough to be heard, not quite far enough to be called insubordination. Elle kept her expression neutral as she approached the cluster of buildings that made up the base's administrative center. She'd been through this before, the skeptical once-overs, the whispered assumptions about desk jockeys who couldn't handle real work. What they saw was a slight woman, maybe 5'6", with dark hair pulled back in regulation fashion and intelligent brown eyes that seemed more suited to reading reports than watching for IEDs. What they didn't see was everything else. Specialist Marquez? The voice belonged to a lanky lieutenant who emerged from the command building, his uniform still bearing the crisp lines of someone who hadn't been downrange long. "I'm Lieutenant Weller. Welcome to Sentinel." "Thank you, sir." Elle's voice was steady, professional. She offered a crisp salute. "Right, well." Weller glanced at his clipboard, clearly uncomfortable with the attention their exchange was drawing. "You'll be attached to 3rd Squad for logistical and surveillance support. Sergeant First Class Booker runs that show. He'll get you oriented." As if summoned by his name, a bear of a man rounded the corner of the nearest building. Sergeant First Class Kyle Rhino Booker stood 6'3" and carried himself like someone who'd earned every inch of his reputation the hard way. His uniform was sun-faded and bore the subtle stains of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk. When he looked at Elle, his expression suggested he was calculating her weight and finding it insufficient. "So you're our new babysitter," Booker said, his voice carrying the gravelly undertone of a career soldier. "Intelligence analyst, right? You ever been outside the wire before, Specialist?" "Yes, Sergeant." Elle's answer was simple, direct. "Afghanistan?" "No, Sergeant." Booker nodded as if this confirmed his worst suspicions. "Well, this ain't Kansas, Dorothy. Out here, intel isn't worth much if you can't stay alive long enough to use it." A younger soldier appeared at Booker's shoulder, barely out of his teens, with the eager energy of someone trying hard to impress. His name tape read Ward, and everything about him suggested he hung on Booker's every word. "This is Private Ward," Booker continued. "Call him Dice. He'll show you to your quarters and get you squared away. Dice, make sure our analyst understands how things work around here." "Roger that, Sergeant," Dice replied with enthusiasm that bordered on hero worship. As Booker walked away, Dice turned to Elle with a grin that didn't quite mask his uncertainty. "Don't mind Rhino. He's actually pretty cool once you prove you're not completely useless." Elle shouldered her bag again. "I'm sure he is." "So, intelligence, huh?" Dice chattered as he led her toward the living quarters. "That's like computers and stuff, right? Reading enemy emails or whatever?" "Something like that." "Cool. I mean, someone's got to do it, right? Can't all be pipe hitters." He glanced at her sideways, clearly fishing for a reaction. When she didn't provide one, he continued. Rhino's been deployed like 6 times. Dude's seen some serious action. He knows who can handle themselves and who can't. They passed a group of soldiers cleaning weapons outside their hooch. Elle caught fragments of conversation. Something about patrol schedules and equipment checks, but the chatter died as they walked by. She felt the familiar weight of judgment, the way conversation shifted when she entered a room. That's Staff Sergeant Kim, Dice said, nodding toward a compact Asian woman who was methodically field stripping an M4. She's our medic. Saved my ass twice already, and I've only been here 3 months. Kim looked up as they approached, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. Unlike the others, she didn't seem to immediately dismiss Elle. Instead, she offered a professional nod. New intel? Kim asked. Specialist Marquez, Elle said. Kim, you'll be working with us on Overwatch duty. Hope you don't mind getting dirty. There was something in Kim's tone, not welcoming exactly, but not hostile either. More like a careful evaluation, the way one professional might size up another. Not a problem, Sergeant. Kim's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval. Good, we'll see. Dice led Elle to a small modular building that served as temporary quarters for transient personnel. The space was Spartan, 2 cots, wall lockers, and a single window that looked out over the motor pool. Elle's roommate was apparently on duty, leaving her alone with her thoughts for the first time since arriving. She unpacked methodically, placing her gear in the wall locker with the same precision she brought to everything else. At the bottom of her duffel, wrapped in a spare uniform, was a small wooden box. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of patches and commendations that told a story she wasn't ready to share. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Marquez, you in there? Elle closed the box and slid it into the back of her locker. Comin'. Dice stood outside with another soldier, this one older, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen multiple deployments. This is Torres, Dice said. He's going to show you the DFAC and get you oriented on the schedule. Torres nodded politely but didn't extend his hand. You'll eat with 3rd Squad. Chow's at 1800. Briefings are every morning at 0700 unless we're on patrol. Questions? No, Sergeant. Good. Word of advice. Stay close to Kim or Dice when you're outside the wire. Some of the guys might not be watching your 6 as closely as they should. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't reassurance either. Elle understood the message. Prove yourself, or risk being left behind. That evening at dinner, Elle sat at the edge of the 3rd Squad table, close enough to be included but far enough to avoid intruding. The conversation flowed around her. Complaints about the heat, speculation about upcoming missions, good-natured ribbing about who'd performed poorly at the rifle range. So Marquez, one of the soldiers said during a lull in conversation, what's your story? College girl playing soldier? Elle looked up from her MRE. Something like that. She's intel, Dice chimed in, clearly trying to be helpful. Probably has all kinds of clearances and stuff. This drew snickers from around the table. Clearances don't stop bullets, someone muttered. Booker entered the DFAC then, his presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the conversation. He grabbed a tray and sat down heavily across from Elle. Marquez, he said without preamble, you'll be riding with Kim and Dice tomorrow. We're doing a route clearance patrol to check some suspected IED sites. Your job is to stay quiet, stay safe, and try not to get in the way. Roger, Sergeant. This isn't a training exercise. People have died on that route. You do exactly what Kim tells you, when she tells you. Clear? Crystal, Sergeant. Booker studied her for a moment, as if trying to read something in her expression. Finding nothing to criticize, he turned his attention to his food. Later that night, as Elle lay on her cot staring at the ceiling, she could hear the muffled conversations from the next hooch over. Fragments drifted through the thin walls. Predictions about how long she'd last. Bets on whether she'd request a transfer after her first patrol. She'd heard it all before, in different languages and different accents, but the sentiment was always the same. Prove yourself or be dismissed. The difference was, this time, she'd chosen to let them underestimate her. This time, she'd decided that anonymity was worth more than recognition. Tomorrow would be her first test. She'd passed harder ones before, but never while deliberately hiding her capabilities. As she drifted off to sleep, Elle wondered if she'd made the right choice in burying her past so deeply. In a place where respect was earned through competence under fire, humility could be just another word for liability. The morning briefing took place in a sweltering command tent that smelled of dust, diesel fuel, and stale coffee. Elle sat in the back row with the other junior enlisted, her notebook open and pen ready. Lieutenant Weller stood at the front, pointing to a map marked with red X's that indicated previous IED strikes. "Route Silver remains hot," Weller said, his voice carrying the careful authority of someone still learning to command. "We've had 3 incidents in the past 2 weeks, all targeting logistical convoys. Today's mission is straightforward: route clearance and reconnaissance. 3rd Squad will take point, with support elements following at a safe distance." Booker raised his hand. "Rules of engagement?" "Standard ROE. Positive identification required for any engagement. We're looking for intel on emplacers, not body count." Ella found herself studying the pattern of previous attacks on the map. There was something there, a subtle arrangement that suggested coordination rather than random opportunistic strikes. She made a note to herself to review the timing data when she had access to the intelligence files. "Marquez," Weller called out, drawing her attention back to the briefing, "you'll be riding in the trail vehicle with Sergeant Kim. Your primary responsibility is communications and pattern recognition. If you see anything unusual, report it immediately." "Roger, sir." After the briefing, the soldiers dispersed to their preparation rituals. Elle checked her gear methodically: radio, extra batteries, first aid kit, ammunition. Everything in its place. Everything serving a purpose. Across the motor pool, she could see Dice adjusting his body armor with the nervous energy of someone still new to the routine. "First time outside the wire with us," Kim said, appearing at Elle's shoulder. The medic's tone was neutral, but her eyes were assessing. "You okay with that?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Stay close, follow orders, and don't try to be a hero. Out there, heroes tend to become casualties real fast." Kim's advice carried the weight of experience, and Elle nodded her understanding. What the medic couldn't know was that Elle had heard similar advice before, in different circumstances, from instructors who'd tested her limits in ways that made today's patrol seem routine. The convoy formed up with practiced efficiency. Booker's vehicle took point, followed by 2 gun trucks and the trail vehicle where Elle rode with Kim and 2 other soldiers. The atmosphere was professional but tense. Everyone understood that stepping outside the wire meant entering a world where split-second decisions could mean the difference between coming home and becoming a casualty statistic. "Radio check," came Booker's voice over the comm system. Each vehicle responded in turn, confirming their communications were clear. Elle adjusted her headset and settled into her seat, her eyes already scanning the terrain visible through the armored windows. Route Silver stretched ahead like a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through brown hills dotted with sparse vegetation. The landscape looked deceptively peaceful, but Elle's training had taught her to see potential threats in every shadow, every pile of debris, every unusual disturbance in the soil pattern. 20 minutes into the patrol, Elle spotted something that made her lean forward. "Sergeant Kim," she said quietly, not wanting to alarm the entire convoy unnecessarily. "What is it?" "The drainage culvert at our 2 o'clock. It's been recently disturbed. Fresh dirt, different color than the surrounding soil." Kim grabbed her binoculars and studied the area Elle had indicated. After a moment, she keyed her radio. "Rhino, this is Doc. Possible disturbance at grid 274512. Recommend we hold position for EOD sweep." Booker's voice crackled back. "Negative, Doc. We checked that culvert yesterday. Keep moving." Elle felt a familiar frustration building. She'd spotted similar signs before. Subtle indicators that saved lives when people bothered to listen. But here, her observations carried no weight beyond their immediate tactical value. "Sergeant," she tried again, "the pattern doesn't match natural erosion. Someone's been digging there recently." Kim relayed the information, but Booker's response was dismissive. "Tell our analyst to save the geology lessons for someone who cares. We're already behind schedule." The convoy continued forward, and Elle watched the suspicious culvert disappear behind them without incident. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe her instincts were rusty. Or maybe the stress of hiding her background was making her paranoid. But deep down, she knew what she'd seen. 15 minutes later, the patrol reached the first checkpoint, a intersection where previous IED strikes had occurred. Booker called for a dismounted reconnaissance, and Elle found herself following Kim and Dice as they spread out to examine the area on foot. "Stay close and keep your eyes open," Kim instructed. "IEDs aren't the only threat out here." Elle nodded and began her own examination of the terrain, noting details that others might miss. The placement of debris, the way vehicle tracks crossed and recrossed in specific patterns, the subtle signs that indicated this location had been surveilled and prepared. "Sergeant Kim," she called out softly, "can you come look at this?" Kim approached, and Elle pointed to a series of marks in the dirt near the road's edge. "These look like observation posts. Someone's been watching this intersection, probably for days." Kim studied the evidence Elle had found: scuff marks where someone had knelt, cigarette butts that were too fresh to have been there long, small indentations that suggested the use of optical equipment. "Rhino needs to see this," Kim said, keying her radio. This time, Booker took the information more seriously. When he arrived at their position, he examined Elle's findings with the methodical attention of a veteran who'd learned to trust his subordinates' observations, at least when they came through Kim. "Good eyes," he admitted grudgingly. "Dice, get EOD up here. I want this whole area swept again." While they waited for the explosive ordnance disposal team, Elle continued her examination of the area. She found more evidence of surveillance: a concealed firing position that offered clear lines of sight to the road, equipment caches that suggested long-term preparation. "You're pretty good at this," Dice said, appearing at her shoulder with his characteristic nervous energy. "How'd you learn to spot stuff like that?" Elle considered her answer carefully. "Training. And experience." "What kind of experience? I thought you were intel." "Different kinds of training," she said, deflecting the question without lying. The EOD team arrived and confirmed Elle's suspicions. The area had been prepared for an ambush, complete with improvised explosive devices that would have devastated any vehicle unlucky enough to trigger them. The discovery led to a broader sweep that uncovered additional threats along the route. As the patrol finally headed back to base, Elle found herself thinking about the morning's events. She'd proven her value through observation and analysis, but she'd also been dismissed and ignored until someone else validated her concerns. It was a delicate balance, contributing enough to be useful without revealing the full extent of her capabilities. "That was good work today," Kim said during the ride back. "Where'd you really learn to read terrain like that?" Elle met the medic's eyes in the reflection of the window. Kim was smart, observant, and clearly suspicious that there was more to Elle's background than her personnel file suggested. "Different places," Elle said. "Different times." Kim nodded slowly, as if filing away another piece of information for future consideration. "Well, wherever you learned it, keep it up. You might just help keep us alive out here." As the convoy rolled through the gates of Forward Sentinel, Elle reflected on the day's lessons. She'd proven she could contribute without revealing her true background, but she'd also seen how quickly valuable intelligence could be dismissed when it came from the wrong source. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself while maintaining the careful facade she'd constructed. The question was, how long could she keep walking the line between competence and concealment before someone started asking the right questions? Elle sat alone in the intelligence section's makeshift workspace, surrounded by the blue glow of multiple computer monitors and the constant hum of cooling fans. It was well past midnight, but sleep had proven elusive. Instead, she'd volunteered for the night shift, claiming she preferred working when the base was quiet. In truth, she needed time to think without the constant weight of observation. The surveillance footage from the past week's IED incidents played across her screens in a mosaic of grainy black and white images. What others saw as random acts of terrorism, Elle was beginning to recognize as something far more sophisticated, a coordinated campaign with patterns that suggested professional military planning. She froze the playback and leaned closer to examine a particular frame. There, in the corner of the image, barely visible through the static, was a figure moving with the measured pace of someone conducting reconnaissance. Elle enhanced the image, adjusting contrast and brightness until the details became clearer. The person was carrying something. Communications equipment, if she had to guess. And their movement pattern suggested they were coordinating with others, positioned outside the camera's field of view. Elle pulled up the timestamps from each incident and began plotting them on a digital map. The pattern that emerged made her stomach tighten with recognition. The attacks weren't random. They were part of a deliberate campaign to disrupt supply lines while gathering intelligence on coalition response patterns. She spent the next 3 hours building a comprehensive analysis, cross-referencing the timing of attacks with patrol schedules, supply convoy routes, and base activity patterns. By the time the first light of dawn began filtering through the windows, she had constructed a model that predicted where the next attack would likely occur. "You're up early." Elle turned to find Lieutenant Weller standing in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who'd been awakened before his preferred time. "Couldn't sleep, sir. Thought I'd review the recent incident reports." Weller approached her workstation, his eyes scanning the multiple displays with the careful attention of an officer trying to appear knowledgeable about subjects beyond his expertise. "Find anything interesting?" "Actually, yes, sir." Elle minimized several windows to focus on her primary analysis. The IED attacks over the past 2 weeks aren't random. They're part of a coordinated intelligence-gathering operation. She walked Weller through her findings, the surveillance evidence, the timing patterns, the strategic placement of attacks designed to provoke specific responses. As she spoke, she could see the lieutenant's expression shift from polite interest to genuine concern. "You're saying they're studying us?" "Yes, sir. Learning our response patterns, our reaction times, our standard operating procedures. Each attack is designed to elicit specific information about our capabilities." Weller studied the timeline Elle had constructed. "What's your recommendation?" "We need to vary our response patterns. Change patrol routes, alter timing, modify our standard procedures, and—" Elle hesitated, knowing her next suggestion might be dismissed. "We should consider proactive operations based on the pattern analysis. I can predict where they're likely to strike next." The lieutenant was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the implications of Elle's analysis. Finally, he nodded. "Write it up as a formal intelligence report. I'll forward it to battalion for review. Sir, with respect, by the time this goes through channels, we'll have missed the opportunity. Based on the pattern, I believe they're planning to hit the northern supply route within the next 48 hours. Weller's expression tightened. "Specialist intelligence analysis is valuable, but operational planning requires more than pattern recognition. We can't restructure our entire mission profile based on speculation." Elle felt the familiar frustration building, but she kept her voice level. "It's not speculation, sir. The data supports a clear conclusion." "The data supports a theory," Weller corrected. "And theories need to be verified through proper channels before they become actionable intelligence." As the lieutenant walked away with her report, Elle stared at her screens and wondered how many lives were lost because good intelligence got buried in bureaucratic processes. She'd seen it before. Critical information dismissed because it came from the wrong source or didn't fit established preconceptions. Later that morning, she found herself in the motor pool, helping Kim with routine vehicle maintenance. It was mindless work that left her hands busy while her mind processed the morning's frustrations. "You look like someone who lost an argument with her computer," Kim observed, not looking up from the engine she was working on. "Something like that." "Want to talk about it?" Elle considered the offer. Kim had proven herself to be observant and trustworthy, but Elle wasn't sure how much to reveal. Just frustrating when you see problems that could be prevented. Such as, "The IED attacks, they're not random. There's a pattern that could help us prevent the next one." Kim stopped working and looked at Elle directly. "What kind of pattern?" Elle explained her analysis in broad terms, leaving out the technical details but conveying the essential conclusion. Kim listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as Elle spoke. "Did you report this?" "Yes. It's being, quote, reviewed through proper channels." Kim's snort of derision suggested she had experience with the speed of military bureaucracy. "How long before the next attack?" "If I'm right, tomorrow, maybe the day after." "And if you're wrong?" "Then nothing happens, and everyone can dismiss me as an overeager analyst who sees patterns where none exist." Kim was quiet for a moment, then returned to her work. I've been doing this job for 6 years. Seen a lot of intel types come and go. Most of them are smart enough, but they think like computers. All data and no instinct." Elle waited, sensing there was more coming. "But every now and then, you meet someone who thinks like a soldier." Someone who understands that good intelligence isn't just about processing information. It's about recognizing threats and acting on them. And? Kim straightened and wiped her hands on a rag. And you think like a soldier. Question is, where'd you learn to do that? Before Elle could answer, Dice appeared around the corner of the vehicle they were working on. His usual cheerful demeanor was subdued, and he looked like someone carrying unwelcome news. Hey, Sergeant Kim, Rhino wants to see both of you. Says it's about tomorrow's mission. Kim and Elle exchanged glances. What kind of mission? Kim asked. Supply convoy escort, northern route. Elle felt her blood turn cold. The northern route, exactly where her analysis had predicted the next attack would occur. And instead of using her intelligence to avoid the trap, they were walking directly into it. As they walked toward the command building, Kim fell into step beside Elle. Your pattern analysis, she said quietly. How confident are you? Very confident. Then we better hope someone starts listening to you real soon. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The briefing room was crowded with personnel from multiple units, more than would typically be assigned to a routine convoy escort. Lieutenant Weller stood at the front with a map display that showed the planned route, while Sergeant Booker sat in the front row with the relaxed posture of someone who'd done this job countless times before. Tomorrow's mission is a high-priority supply run to Forward Operating Base Guardian, Weller began. Intelligence indicates increased enemy activity in the area, so we're taking extra precautions. Elle listened to the briefing with growing alarm. Every detail, the route, the timing, the composition of the convoy, matched her predictions perfectly. They were giving the enemy exactly what they'd been working to achieve, a high-value target following predictable patterns. When Weller opened the floor for questions, Elle raised her hand. Sir, have you considered alternate routes? The northern approach may be compromised. Based on what intelligence, specialist? The pattern analysis I submitted this morning. This mission profile matches the enemy's apparent preparation timeline. Booker turned to look at her, his expression skeptical. Specialist, we've been running this route for months. We know every rock and pothole between here and Guardian. Sergeant, that's exactly why it's compromised. They've been studying our patterns, learning our procedures. This mission gives them everything they need to. That's enough, Specialist, Weller interrupted. Your concerns are noted, but operational planning takes more factors into account than theoretical pattern analysis. Elle felt Kim's hand on her arm, a subtle warning not to push further. But as she looked around the room at the faces of soldiers who would be walking into what she was certain was a trap, she struggled with the decision to remain silent. The briefing concluded with standard reminders about communication protocols and rules of engagement. As the room emptied, Elle found herself walking beside Dice, who seemed unusually subdued. You really think they're waiting for us out there? He asked quietly. Elle looked at the young soldier, barely old enough to vote, but already carrying the weight of life and death responsibilities. Yeah, I do. Then why aren't they listening to you? It was a good question, and one Elle had been asking herself for years. Because I'm new, because I'm intel, because I haven't proven myself yet. Take your pick. Dice was quiet for a moment. Maybe you should prove yourself then. As Elle walked back to her quarters that evening, she found herself thinking about Dice's words. She'd spent months trying to blend in, to serve without drawing attention, to contribute without revealing the full extent of her capabilities. But tomorrow, good soldiers were going to walk into an ambush because she'd chosen anonymity over advocacy. She opened her wall locker and looked at the small wooden box hidden in the back. Inside were commendations and patches that told a different story, one of leadership under fire, of decisive action when others hesitated, of the kind of credibility that could make people listen when lives were at stake. Tomorrow's mission would test more than her analytical skills. It would force her to choose between the comfortable shadows she'd chosen and the spotlight she'd deliberately avoided. The question was whether she could live with the consequences of remaining hidden when speaking up might save lives. As she lay on her cot that night, Elle stared at the ceiling and wondered if her decision to bury her past had been wisdom or cowardice. Tomorrow would likely provide the answer. The convoy rolled out at 0600 under a sky that promised another scorching day. Elle sat in the passenger seat of the trail vehicle, her eyes scanning the terrain through armored glass while her hands checked and rechecked her equipment. Despite her warnings being dismissed, the mission was proceeding exactly as planned, which meant exactly as the enemy had anticipated. "You're quiet this morning," Kim observed from the driver's seat. "More than usual." Elle keyed her radio to monitor the chatter between vehicles. Booker's voice crackled through, professional and calm as he coordinated the convoy's movement through the first checkpoint. "Just focused, Sergeant." Dice's voice came through the comm system from the lead vehicle. "Hey, Doc, you seeing anything weird out there? This place gives me the creeps." Kim smiled slightly. "Kid's got good instincts. Too bad his sergeant doesn't listen to them." They were moving through a narrow valley now, with rocky ridges rising on either side. Exactly the kind of terrain that made convoy commanders nervous. Elle had studied this route extensively during her analysis, and every tactical instinct she possessed was screaming warnings. "Contact left!" Booker's voice exploded through the radio, just as the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoed off the canyon walls. The convoy immediately executed a practiced response, vehicles accelerating to escape the kill zone while gunners returned suppressive fire toward the ridgeline. But as Elle had predicted, this wasn't a random ambush. The enemy had studied their procedures, and they were ready. IED, IED, front. Dice's panicked voice cut through the radio chatter, just as a massive explosion erupted 50 meters ahead of the lead vehicle. The convoy skidded to a halt, trapped between the blast crater ahead and the gunfire raking down from the ridges. "This is Sentinel Base, we have contact." Weller's voice was tight with stress as he tried to coordinate support. "Multiple shooters, unknown strength, requesting immediate air support." Elle watched the tactical situation develop with the cold clarity that came from training and experience. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly. High ground on both sides, escape routes planned, fields of fire calculated to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure. It was textbook asymmetric warfare, executed by people who understood how Americans fought. "Rhinos down!" Kim's medical training kicked in as she grabbed her aid bag. "I need to get to that vehicle." Through the chaos of gunfire and radio chatter, Elle could see the lead vehicle sitting motionless, smoke rising from its engine compartment. Booker wasn't responding to radio calls, and Dice's voice had gone silent. "Negative, Doc," Weller's voice crackled through the comm. "Too much fire. We need to establish a base of fire before any movement." But Kim was already moving, and Elle found herself following without conscious thought. They sprinted across the open ground between vehicles, using what cover they could find while bullets sparked off rocks around them. The lead vehicle's passenger door hung open, and Elle could see Booker slumped unconscious against his harness, blood running from a head wound. Dice was pressed against the far door, his rifle pointed toward the ridgeline, but his hands shaking too badly to engage targets effectively. "Booker's got a concussion, maybe worse," Kim reported as she began her assessment. "Dice, you hit?" "No, Sergeant, but I can't see them. They're everywhere." Elle looked up at the ridgeline, where muzzle flashes marked enemy positions. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were pinned down in a kill zone with wounded personnel and no clear escape route. In 30 seconds, this was going to become a catastrophe. Without thinking, Elle keyed her radio to the command frequency. "All Sentinel elements, this is Marquez. I have eyes on enemy positions. Stand by for fire mission." "Marquez, get off this net." Weller's voice was sharp with stress and anger. "You're not qualified to direct fires." Elle ignored him and switched to the air support frequency. "Predator 2-1, this is ground observer. I have multiple targets, grid 417268. Enemy personnel in prepared positions along ridgeline, approximately squad strength." The Predator pilot's voice was calm and professional. "Ground observer, Predator 2-1, confirm you are qualified to direct fires." Elle looked at Kim, who was staring at her with wide eyes. There was no time for explanations or half-truths. "Predator 2-1, confirmed. I am Ranger qualified and authorized for close air support direction." "Roger, ground observer. Predator 2-1 has eyes on target area. Request confirmation of friendly positions." As Elle coordinated the airstrike with the precision of someone who'd done it dozens of times before, she was dimly aware of the shocked silence on the convoy's internal communications. But her focus was entirely on the tactical problem. Friendly positions, enemy locations, danger, close calculations. that had to be perfect or people died. Danger close, she called as the Predator's Hellfire missile streaked down from above. The explosion shattered the ridgeline position, sending debris cascading into the valley below. Target neutralized, the pilot reported. Ground observer, that was excellent work. You have additional targets? Elle was already scanning for the remaining enemy positions, her mind automatically processing angles, distances, and fields of fire. Predator 2-1, secondary targets along the eastern ridge. Stand by for coordinates. The second missile eliminated the remaining organized resistance, and the sporadic gunfire that followed was clearly from individuals breaking contact rather than coordinated defense. In less than 5 minutes, Elle had turned a potential disaster into a tactical victory. All elements, this is Marquez, she said calmly into her radio. Area is secure. Medical personnel can move freely to assist casualties. As the immediate crisis passed, Elle became aware of the stares directed her way. Kim was looking at her with undisguised amazement, while Dice had stopped pretending to watch for threats and was openly gawking. "Who the hell are you?" Kim whispered. Before Elle could answer, Booker stirred in his seat, his eyes focusing slowly as he regained consciousness. "What happened? Did we get hit?" "Ambush," Kim reported professionally. "Enemy neutralized by air support. You've got a concussion." Booker's eyes found Elle, who was calmly packing away her radio equipment. "Who called in the airstrike?" Kim hesitated, clearly uncertain how to explain what she'd just witnessed. "Marquez did. She directed the whole engagement." Booker stared at Elle for a long moment, confusion and suspicion warring in his expression. "Intelligence analysts don't direct close air support." "No," Elle said quietly. "They don't." The evacuation of the convoy proceeded smoothly with no additional contact from enemy forces. But the atmosphere during the ride back to base was thick with unspoken questions. Elle could feel the weight of scrutiny from everyone in the vehicle, the sense that something fundamental had shifted in their understanding of who she was. As they pulled through the gates of Forward Sentinel, Booker was still staring at her with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Elle knew that her carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to crumble, and tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. But for now, everyone was alive. And sometimes, that was the only answer that mattered. The debriefing should have been routine, mission summary, casualty report, lessons learned. Instead, Elle found herself sitting in a crowded conference room, while Lieutenant Weller struggled to explain how his intelligence analyst had single-handedly coordinated a close air support mission that saved the entire convoy. "So you're telling me," Colonel Harrington leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical, "that Specialist Marquez directed 2 Hellfire strikes with textbook precision, despite having no formal training in fire direction procedures?" Weller shifted uncomfortably. "That's what the records show, sir. The Predator pilot confirmed she used proper protocols and terminology throughout the engagement." "And where exactly did an intelligence analyst learn these protocols?" All eyes turned to Elle, who had remained silent throughout most of the debriefing. She met the colonel's gaze steadily. "Various training programs, sir." "That's not an answer, Specialist." Elle considered her options. She could continue deflecting, inventing explanations that would satisfy curiosity without revealing the truth. Or she could acknowledge what everyone in the room was beginning to suspect, that her background contained elements that didn't match her current assignment. "I've had additional training beyond my current military occupational specialty, sir." Colonel Harrington studied her for a long moment. "What kind of additional training?" Before Elle could answer, Booker spoke up from across the table. "Sir, if I may. During the engagement, Specialist Marquez demonstrated tactical knowledge and leadership capabilities that are unusual for her rank and position." "Unusual how?" Booker looked directly at Elle. She moved like infantry, thought like infantry, commanded like infantry. The room fell silent. Elle could feel the weight of expectation, the sense that this conversation had reached a tipping point where careful deflection would no longer suffice. "Specialist," Colonel Harrington said quietly, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect a direct answer. What is your actual military background?" Elle looked around the room at the faces of people she'd served with, fought beside, saved from potential disaster. Kim was watching her with curiosity rather than suspicion. Dice looked like someone witnessing the solution to a mystery he'd been trying to solve for weeks. Even Weller seemed more intrigued than angry. "I'm Ranger qualified, sir." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Colonel Harrington leaned forward, his expression shifting from skepticism to intense interest. "Rangers, when did you complete the course?" 2 years ago, sir." "And your previous assignment?" Elle hesitated, knowing that her next words would shatter any remaining pretense of anonymity. "Special Operations. Joint Task Force operations in classified locations." Booker's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. "Jesus Christ, you're a Ranger." "I was a Ranger, Sergeant. Now I'm an intelligence analyst." "Nobody walks away from Special Operations to become an analyst," Colonel Harrington said. "What happened?" Elle had rehearsed this explanation dozens of times, but she'd never expected to deliver it in front of an audience that included the people she'd fought beside. "I requested a transfer to conventional forces after completing my initial Special Operations commitment." Why? The question she'd been dreading, because the honest answer revealed more about her motivations than she preferred to share. "Personal reasons, sir." Colonel Harrington studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, we'll discuss those personal reasons privately later. For now, I want to understand how one of my intelligence analysts happens to be qualified to direct close air support missions." Elle walked them through her training and experience, the schools she'd attended, the operations she'd participated in, the skills she'd developed during 2 years of special operations assignments. As she spoke, she could see understanding dawning in the faces around the table. "So when you submitted that intelligence analysis about IED patterns," Weller said slowly, "you weren't just looking at data. You were reading the tactical situation like someone who'd planned similar operations." "Yes, sir." "And your recommendations about varying patrol routes and response patterns, based on operational experience with similar threats." Booker was shaking his head slowly. "I've been treating you like a liability when you're probably the most qualified tactical asset on this base." "I never wanted to be treated differently, Sergeant. I came here to serve, not to stand out." "Why?" Kim asked. "Why hide credentials like that?" Elle looked at the medic who'd become her closest ally among the squad. "Because the moment people know your special operations, everything changes. Every conversation becomes about what you've done. Every assignment becomes about what you can do. I wanted to serve without the weight of expectations." "But those expectations exist for a reason," Colonel Harrington pointed out. "Your training and experience represent a significant investment in your capabilities. Using you as a conventional intelligence analyst is like using a surgeon to take temperatures. With respect, sir, every soldier serves according to their assignment. My job was intelligence analysis, and that's what I did. Until today, when you did a lot more than analyze intelligence." Elle nodded. "Today, people were going to die if I didn't act. So I acted." The colonel leaned back in his chair, clearly weighing the implications of what he'd learned. "Specialist. You'll remain in your current assignment for now, but I'm recommending you for reassignment to a position that better utilizes your qualifications." "Sir, I'd prefer to remain with 3rd Squad." "Why?" Elle looked around the table at the faces of soldiers she'd fought beside. "Because they're good soldiers, and I can help keep them alive." After the debriefing, Elle found herself walking back to the squad area with Booker, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since learning about her background. "You know," he said finally, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't, Sergeant. You treated me exactly the way my assignment suggested you should." "I treated you like you were weak, like you didn't belong here." Elle stopped walking and faced him. "I am exactly who I appeared to be, Sergeant. I'm an intelligence analyst who happens to have additional training. Nothing more, nothing less." Booker studied her for a moment. "Rangers don't just happen to have additional training. Rangers are warriors who chose to be elite. Quote, and now I'm choosing to be something else." "Why?" It was the question everyone wanted answered, and Elle wasn't sure she could explain it in a way that would make sense to career soldiers who'd built their identities around advancement and recognition. "Because sometimes the best way to serve is to blend in, because quiet competence can be more valuable than loud leadership. Because not every warrior needs to be a hero." Booker nodded slowly. "I can respect that, but you should know what you did today. Saving our asses when the mission went sideways, that was heroic whether you wanted it to be or not." That evening, Elle sat in her quarters staring at the wooden box she'd kept hidden in her wall locker. The patches and commendations inside told a story she'd tried to leave behind, but today had proven that some stories couldn't be completely buried. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Kim standing outside with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "Mind if I come in?" Elle stepped aside and Kim entered, handing her one of the cups before settling into the room's single chair. "So," Kim said, "Ranger School?" "Yes." "Special Operations?" "Yes." "And you've been letting us treat you like a rookie analyst for the past month." Elle sipped her coffee. "I've been doing my job." Kim laughed. "Your job today was saving all our lives. I'd say you're overqualified for routine intelligence analysis." "Maybe." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Kim spoke again. "You know, I've been wondering about you since the day you arrived. The way you moved, the way you observed things, the way you never seemed intimidated by anything. Now it makes sense. I hope it doesn't change anything." Kim studied Elle's face. "Why would it change anything? You're still the same person who helped me with vehicle maintenance, who spotted those surveillance signs on patrol, who figured out the IED pattern nobody else could see. The only thing that's changed is now I understand why you're so good at what you do." Elle felt some of the tension she'd been carrying begin to ease. "I was worried people would treat me differently." "People probably will treat you differently," Kim admitted, "but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe it's time you stopped hiding what you're capable of." As Kim left, Elle realized that her carefully constructed anonymity was officially over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, and probably new questions about her past. But for the first time since arriving at Forward Sentinel, she felt like she could stop pretending to be less than she was. The morning briefing had a different energy. Elle could feel it the moment she walked into the command tent, a subtle shift in the way people looked at her, the way conversations paused when she passed. Word had spread quickly through the base about the previous day's engagement, and with it came a new kind of attention she'd hoped to avoid. Colonel Harrington was already at the podium when she took her seat, but instead of beginning with the usual operational updates, he turned his attention directly to her. "Specialist Marquez, I'd like you to present your intelligence analysis to the group." Every head in the tent turned toward Elle. She could see curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, respect in the faces looking back at her. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when quiet competence became public performance. Elle stood and moved to the front of the tent, accepting the laser pointer Colonel Harrington offered her. "Yes, sir?" The map display showed the operational area around Forward Sentinel, marked with red symbols indicating recent IED attacks and ambush sites. Elle had spent most of the night updating her analysis, incorporating new data from yesterday's engagement. "The pattern of enemy activity over the past 3 weeks indicates a coordinated intelligence-gathering operation," she began, her voice carrying the confident authority that came from certainty in her conclusions. "Each attack has been designed to elicit specific information about our response procedures, reaction times, and tactical capabilities." She used the laser pointer to highlight specific locations on the map. "The timing and placement of IED strikes correlates directly with our patrol schedules and supply convoy routes. The enemy has been studying our patterns and adapting their tactics accordingly." Lieutenant Weller raised his hand. "How can you be certain this isn't just coincidental timing?" Elle clicked to the next slide, which showed a detailed timeline analysis. "The statistical probability of random timing matching our operational patterns this closely is less than 2%. Additionally, surveillance evidence from multiple sites confirms the presence of observation teams conducting extended reconnaissance." Quote, "She spent the next 20 minutes walking through her analysis, signal intercepts that suggested coordinated planning, tactical assessments that indicated professional military training, and predictive modeling that had accurately forecast yesterday's ambush location. Based on this analysis," Elle concluded, "I recommend immediate changes to our operational patterns. Vary patrol routes and timing. Implement deception operations to mask our actual intentions, and consider proactive operations to disrupt their intelligence-gathering network." Colonel Harrington nodded approvingly. "Outstanding work, Specialist. Captain Morrison, I want you to coordinate with Specialist Marquez on implementing these recommendations immediately." As the briefing concluded and personnel began filing out, Elle found herself surrounded by officers and senior NCOs with questions about specific tactical recommendations. It was the kind of professional attention she'd successfully avoided for months, but now seemed unavoidable. "Specialist," Captain Morrison approached with a folder of documents. "I'd like you to review our operational planning for the next 2 weeks. Your insights could be invaluable in preventing future incidents." Elle accepted the folder, knowing that her role at FOB Sentinel had fundamentally changed. "Yes, sir." Later that afternoon, she was working in the intelligence section when Dice appeared in the doorway, his usual nervous energy replaced by something approaching awe. "Hey, Specialist Marquez, Sergeant Booker wants to see you." Elle found Booker in the motor pool, where he was conducting weapons training with several junior soldiers. When he saw her approaching, he called for a break and waved her over. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," he began without preamble. "About serving without expectations." "Yes, Sergeant? I think I understand it now, but I also think you're doing yourself and everyone else a disservice by hiding what you're capable of." Elle studied his face, seeing genuine respect where there had once been skepticism. "How so?" "Because good soldiers learn from good leaders. And these kids," he gestured toward the young soldiers practicing their weapons drills, "they need to see what right looks like." Before Elle could respond, one of the soldiers called out, "Sergeant Booker! Is it true Specialist Marquez is a ranger?" Booker looked at Elle, a question in his eyes. Elle nodded slightly. "That's right, Martinez. Specialist Marquez completed ranger school and served in special operations before being assigned here." The effect was immediate. The soldiers stopped their training and gathered around, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright admiration. "What was ranger school like?" one asked. "Did you really call in those airstrikes yesterday?" asked another. Elle found herself answering their questions, sharing carefully edited stories about training and experiences that suddenly felt less like secrets to be hidden and more like knowledge to be shared. As she spoke, she could see the impact of her words. Young soldiers understanding that excellence was achievable, that leadership came in many forms. "The most important thing I learned," she concluded, "is that being a ranger isn't about being the loudest or the toughest. It's about being reliable when others are counting on you." As the soldiers returned to their training, Booker walked with Elle toward the command building. "You're good at this," he said. "At what?" "Teaching, leading, inspiring people to be better than they thought they could be." Elle considered his words. "I'm just sharing experience. That's what good leaders do." They were interrupted by the approach of a Humvee that Elle didn't recognize, a vehicle bearing the markings of a higher headquarters unit. As it stopped near the command building, a figure emerged that made Elle's heart skip a beat. Captain Darius Al-Karim stepped out of the vehicle with the confident bearing of an officer who'd earned his rank through competence rather than time in service. He was exactly as Elle remembered, tall, lean, with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. When he saw her, he smiled with genuine warmth. "Well, well, Specialist Marquez, or should I say, my former team leader." Elle felt every eye in the immediate area turn toward them. "Captain Al-Karim, this is unexpected. I was in the area and heard some interesting reports about an intelligence analyst who demonstrated some unusual tactical capabilities. Thought I'd stop by and see how my best student was adapting to her new assignment." The implications of his words hung in the air like a challenge. Elle realized that her past was about to become very public, very quickly. "Sir, perhaps we should discuss this privately." Al-Karim's smile widened. "Oh, I think the time for privacy has passed, don't you? Besides, I'm curious to meet the people who've been serving alongside one of the finest tactical leaders I've ever had the privilege to work with." Booker stepped forward, his expression indicating he was rapidly reassessing everything he thought he knew about Elle. "Captain, did you say team leader?" "Indeed I did, Sergeant. Specialist Marquez led a joint special operations team for 18 months. Conducted over 40 successful missions without a single friendly casualty. One of the most decorated soldiers I've ever served with." Elle closed her eyes briefly, knowing that her carefully constructed anonymity had just been completely demolished. When she opened them, she found herself looking into faces filled with shock, respect, and, in some cases, understanding. "Captain," she said quietly, "was this really necessary?" Al-Karim's expression became serious. "Elle, you can't hide what you are forever. These people deserve to know they're serving alongside someone extraordinary." As word of Al-Karim's arrival and his revelations spread through the base, Elle realized that her time of blending into the background was definitively over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, and probably a conversation she'd been avoiding for 2 years. But looking at the faces around her, Booker's newfound respect, Dice's obvious admiration, Kim's knowing smile, she wondered if maybe it was time to stop running from her past and start embracing what it could offer to her future. The secure conference room in the command building felt smaller, with Captain Al-Karim's presence filling it. Elle sat across from him, acutely aware of the weight of scrutiny from Colonel Harrington, Lieutenant Weller, and Sergeant Booker. The walls seemed to press in as Al-Karim opened a classified folder that she recognized, her complete service record, including the parts that had been locked away under security classifications she'd hoped would never be opened. "Gentlemen," Al-Karim began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to briefing senior commanders. "What I'm about to share with you is classified secret. Specialist Marquez's previous assignment was with Joint Special Operations Command, specifically Task Force Silver, conducting direct action and reconnaissance missions in classified locations." Colonel Harrington leaned forward. "What was her role?" "Team leader," Al-Karim said simply. "She commanded a 6-person special operations team for 18 months, conducting high-risk missions in denied territory." Elle watched Booker's face as the implications sank in. A team leader in special operations wasn't just someone with additional training. It was someone who'd been entrusted with the lives of elite soldiers in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. "Her record speaks for itself," Al-Karim continued, reading from the file. 43 successful missions, 0 friendly casualties. Multiple commendations for tactical innovation and leadership under fire." "Then why," Weller asked, his voice tight with confusion, "is she here as an intelligence analyst?" Al-Karim looked at Elle, clearly giving her the opportunity to answer. When she remained silent, he continued. "Specialist Marquez requested transfer to conventional forces following media attention that compromised her operational security." "Media attention?" Colonel Harrington asked. Elle finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "I was involved in an operation that received significant press coverage. The attention made it impossible to continue special operations work effectively." "What kind of operation?" Al-Karim consulted the file again. "Operation Coppershield, a hostage rescue mission that saved 14 aid workers from terrorist captivity. The mission was leaked to the press, and Specialist Marquez's photograph appeared in several national publications." Elle remembered that day clearly, the moment her career in special operations effectively ended. Not because of failure, but because of success that had been too visible, too public for someone who needed to remain in the shadows. "The media portrayed her as a symbol," Al-Karim continued. "The first woman to successfully lead a special operations rescue mission. But symbolic figures can't continue operational work. They become targets instead of assets." Booker was staring at Elle with an expression she couldn't quite read. "So you walked away?" "I requested reassignment to protect the operational security of my team," Elle corrected, "and to continue serving without becoming a liability." "A liability?" Colonel Harrington's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Specialist, your record indicates you're one of the most capable tactical leaders in the Army. My record also indicates that I attracted the wrong kind of attention. In special operations, anonymity is a survival tool. Once that's compromised, effectiveness is compromised." Al-Karim closed the file and looked around the room. "Gentlemen, I came here because I heard reports of an intelligence analyst who single-handedly directed a close air support mission with textbook precision. That analyst turned out to be the same soldier who once led my most effective special operations team." "And what does that mean for her current assignment?" Weller asked. "That depends on what she wants," Al-Karim said, turning to Elle. "I have authorization to offer you several options. Return to special operations with a different unit, assignment to a strategic planning position, or promotion to warrant officer with specialized intelligence responsibilities." Elle felt the weight of expectation from everyone in the room. These were opportunities that any soldier would consider career-defining, chances to advance and utilize skills that had taken years to develop. But they were also exactly what she'd been trying to escape. "I'd like to remain with 3rd Squad," she said quietly. "Why?" Al-Karim asked, though his tone suggested he might already know the answer. Elle looked at Booker, then at Weller. "Because this squad needs experience, and I can provide that without compromising operational security. Because these soldiers deserve to have someone watching their backs who knows how to keep them alive." And because, Booker interjected, she's already proven she belongs here. Al-Karim smiled. I thought you might say that, which is why I have another proposal. He opened another folder, this one containing documents Elle didn't recognize. The Army is establishing a new program. Experienced special operations personnel embedded with conventional units to provide tactical expertise and training. It's called the Distributed Operations Advisory Program. What would that involve? Colonel Harrington asked. Specialist Marquez would retain her current rank and assignment, but with additional responsibilities for tactical training and mission planning. She'd work directly with squad and platoon leaders to improve operational effectiveness. Elle considered the proposal. It would formalize what she'd already begun doing, sharing knowledge and experience without seeking recognition or advancement. It would allow her to serve in the way she'd chosen, while acknowledging the reality of her capabilities. Would I remain with 3rd Squad? As their primary advisor, yes, with additional responsibilities for training other squads as needed. Booker leaned forward. What does that mean for me, for my authority as squad leader? Al-Karim looked at Elle. What do you think it should mean? Elle met Booker's eyes. It means Sergeant Booker remains the squad leader, and I remain a specialist who happens to have additional experience to share. Chain of command doesn't change. Respect doesn't change. The only thing that changes is acknowledgement of what I can contribute. Booker nodded slowly. I can work with that. Colonel Harrington studied the proposal documents. This would be a pilot program? Yes, sir, with potential for expansion based on results. And Specialist Marquez would be comfortable with this level of visibility? Elle considered the question carefully. The program would mean some recognition, some attention, but not the kind of public profile that had forced her out of special operations. It would allow her to serve according to her capabilities while maintaining the low profile she preferred. Yes, sir, I think I would be. Al-Karim gathered his documents. Then I'll recommend approval. Specialist Marquez, you'll receive official notification within the week. As the meeting concluded and participants began filing out, Al-Karim lingered to speak with Elle privately. You know, he said, when you requested that transfer 2 years ago, I thought you were making a mistake. Walking away from everything you'd worked for because of media attention that would have faded eventually. And now? Now I think you understood something the rest of us missed, that sometimes the best way to lead is from the middle, not from the front. That influence doesn't require recognition. Elle nodded. I just wanted to serve without being a symbol. And instead, you became something better, an example. As Al-Karim left, Elle found herself alone in the conference room with her thoughts. In 24 hours, her carefully constructed anonymity had been completely dismantled. But instead of feeling exposed or vulnerable, she felt something unexpected. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than she was, tired of watching good soldiers struggle with problems she could help solve. The new assignment would allow her to serve authentically while maintaining the kind of profile she could live with. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Booker entered, his expression serious but not hostile. I wanted to thank you, he said. For what? For not making me feel like an idiot for the way I treated you, for being professional about it, for not rubbing my face in how wrong I was. Elle studied his face. You weren't wrong, Sergeant. You treated me exactly the way my assignment and behavior suggested you should. I never gave you reason to think otherwise. But you could have. At any time, you could have set me straight. Setting you straight wasn't my job. My job was supporting the mission and keeping the squad effective. Booker nodded. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're staying. These kids, hell, all of us, we can learn a lot from you. As he turned to leave, Elle called after him. Sergeant? Yeah? Thank you for being willing to learn. Alone again, Elle realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and probably new attention she'd preferred to avoid. But for the first time since arriving at Forward Sentinel, she felt like she could stop pretending to be something she wasn't. She was a ranger. She was a leader. She was a soldier who'd chosen to serve quietly, but effectively. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what these soldiers needed her to be. 3 days after the classified briefing, Elle found herself kneeling beside Booker as they studied satellite imagery spread across the hood of a Humvee. The morning air carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel and dust, but there was something different about the atmosphere, a sense of partnership rather than the careful deference she'd grown accustomed to. "The target building is here," Booker said, pointing to a compound roughly 2 kilometers north of their position. "Intelligence indicates it's being used as a staging area for IED construction. 3 to 5 enemy personnel, unknown weapons." Elle studied the imagery with the practiced eye of someone who'd planned dozens of similar operations. The compound was tactically sound. Multiple escape routes, good fields of observation, defensive positions that would make a direct assault costly. "They've chosen the location well," she observed. "High ground, clear lines of sight, multiple egress routes. This isn't random. Someone with tactical training selected this position." "That's what I was thinking," Booker agreed, "which is why I wanted your input on the approach." It was the first time he'd asked for her tactical opinion as an equal, rather than seeking her assessment as an analyst. The shift in their dynamic was subtle but significant, a recognition that her experience had value beyond intelligence gathering. Dice appeared at Elle's shoulder, his equipment loaded and his expression carrying the nervous energy that preceded combat operations. "So we're really going after these guys?" "That's the mission," Booker confirmed. "Simple target interdiction. Get in, clear the site, collect any intelligence, get out." Elle continued studying the satellite photos. "The approaches are limited. Open ground for the last 400 meters. No natural concealment. If they're watching, and they will be, we'll be exposed for the final advance." "Suggestions?" Elle traced potential routes with her finger. "Two-team approach. Primary team takes the direct route as a fixing force, drawing attention and establishing a base of fire. Secondary team uses this wadi to approach from the east, hitting them from their blind spot." Booker nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. I'll take the fixing force with Martinez and Thompson. You take Dice and Kim on the flanking approach." "Sergeant," Elle said carefully, "I'm not the team leader here." "No, but you're the most qualified person to execute the flanking maneuver. And frankly, I trust your tactical judgment more than my own ego." It was a remarkable admission from a career NCO who'd built his reputation on confident leadership. Elle realized that Booker's evolution was as significant as her own. He was learning to value competence over rank, effectiveness over pride. 30 minutes later, they moved out in 2 vehicles, maintaining radio silence until they reached the drop-off point. The terrain was typical Afghan countryside, rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation, with rocky outcroppings that provided both concealment and observation points. Elle led her small team through the wadi, using the natural terrain to mask their movement while maintaining visual contact with Booker's element. Dice moved behind her with the cautious competence of someone who'd learned to trust her judgment, while Kim brought up the rear with the steady professionalism of a combat veteran. "Movement in the target building," Dice whispered, pointing toward the compound. 2 individuals, second-floor window." Elle raised her binoculars and confirmed the sighting. "They're definitely watching the main approach. Looks like they're expecting company." She keyed her radio softly. "Rhino, this is Fox. Target is occupied. Personnel observed in overwatch positions." "Copy, Fox. Beginning approach in 5 minutes." Elle checked her watch and signaled her team to continue forward. The key to the operation was timing. Booker's team needed to draw attention at exactly the right moment to allow her element to reach their assault position undetected. The sound of distant gunfire indicated that Booker had made contact. Almost immediately, Elle could see movement in the compound as defenders repositioned to engage the threat from the west. "Now," she whispered, leading Dice and Kim in a rapid advance toward the compound's eastern wall. They reached the perimeter without being detected, taking positions that allowed them to observe the main building. Elle could see muzzle flashes from windows as the defenders engaged Booker's team, but their attention was entirely focused on the obvious threat. 2 shooters, second floor, Elle reported quietly. 1 on the first floor, position unclear. "I've got eyes on the first floor target," Kim whispered back. "Kitchen window, armed with an AK." Elle considered their options. The smart, tactical choice was to wait for Booker's element to suppress the defenders, then advance under covering fire. But the sound of automatic weapons suggested the enemy was well armed and determined to fight. "Rhino, this is Fox," she called over the radio. "We're in position for assault. What's your status?" "Taking heavy fire," Booker replied, his voice tight with stress. "These guys are dug in deep. We need to end this quickly before they call for reinforcements." Elle made the decision that separated leaders from followers. Fox is going in. Stand by to shift fire on my signal. She turned to Dice and Kim. We go through the back door. Kim, you take the kitchen target. Dice, follow me to the stairs. Clear the first floor, then move up. Roger, Kim replied without hesitation. Got it, Dice said, though Elle could hear the nervousness in his voice. Elle led them to the back entrance, where a simple wooden door stood between them and close-quarters combat with an unknown number of enemy fighters. She tested the handle, unlocked, and slowly pushed the door open. The interior of the building was dimly lit and smelled of cordite and unwashed bodies. Elle could hear movement above. Footsteps, muffled voices, the sounds of people reloading weapons under stress. She signaled Kim toward the kitchen, then led Dice toward a narrow staircase that climbed to the second floor. Each step required careful placement to avoid creaking boards that might alert the defenders above. At the top of the stairs, Elle paused to listen. Two voices, speaking in Pashto, coming from a room at the front of the building. She hand-signaled to Dice. 2 targets, front room, prepare for immediate action. The assault happened in seconds. Elle pushed through the doorway with Dice behind her, engaging 2 fighters who were positioned at windows overlooking Booker's position. Training and muscle memory took over. Smooth movement, precise shot placement, immediate assessment for additional threats. Clear, Elle called out as both targets went down. Kitchen clear, Kim's voice echoed from below. Building secure, Elle reported over the radio. Rhino, you can advance. The firefight that had seemed so intense moments before was suddenly over. Elle found herself standing in a room filled with improvised explosive device components, technical manuals, and communications equipment that would provide valuable intelligence about enemy operations. Jesus, Dice said, looking around at the bomb-making materials. These guys were busy. Kim appeared at the top of the stairs, her medical training automatically assessing the casualties. Both KIA. No friendly wounded. Elle was already photographing documents and equipment with her camera, documenting intelligence that would help prevent future attacks. But part of her mind was processing the tactical lessons of the engagement. How quickly situations could change. How critical timing and coordination were to successful operations. Booker's voice came through on the radio. Fox, this is Rhino. Outstanding work. We're moving to your position now. When Booker arrived, Elle could see the respect in his expression as he surveyed the scene. Clean work, he said simply. Textbook room clearing. Team effort, Elle replied. Kim and Dice performed perfectly. Dice beamed at the praise, but Elle could see that he was also processing what he'd just experienced. The reality of close-quarters combat, the weight of life-and-death decisions, the way training and leadership made the difference between success and disaster. As they prepared to evacuate the site, Kim pulled Elle aside. You know, watching you work up there, that was something else. Like watching a masterclass in tactical movement. Quote, It was just application of training. No, Kim said firmly. It was leadership. The way you made decisions, kept us calm, coordinated the assault. That's not something you learn from a manual. As they loaded the captured intelligence into their vehicles, Elle realized that something had changed during the operation. She'd stopped hiding her capabilities and started using them naturally, without self-consciousness or apology. More importantly, the team had accepted her leadership without question, following her into combat because they trusted her competence, not her rank. The ride back to Forward Sentinel was quiet, each team member processing the morning's events in their own way. But Elle could sense a new dynamic in the group, a confidence that came from successful operations, a trust that came from shared risk. Hey, Specialist, Dice said during the ride back, can I ask you something? Sure. When we were going up those stairs, I was scared as hell, but you seemed completely calm. How do you do that? Elle considered her answer carefully. Fear is normal, it keeps you alive, but training teaches you to use fear instead of being controlled by it. The more you train, the more automatic your responses become. So it gets easier? It gets more familiar. You learn to trust your training and your team. Dice nodded thoughtfully. I want to learn to do that, to be that calm under pressure. Then we'll work on it, Elle said. All of us will work on it together. As Forward Sentinel came into view, Elle reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. She'd arrived as a deliberately anonymous intelligence analyst, determined to serve without recognition. Now she was functioning as what she'd always been, a tactical leader who happened to be assigned as an analyst. The question was no longer whether she could maintain her anonymity. The question was whether she could use her revealed capabilities to make the soldiers around her better, safer, more effective. And based on the morning's operation, she was beginning to believe the answer was yes. The ceremony wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Colonel Harrington had made it clear that the recognition would be low-key, professional, and focused on the team's effectiveness rather than individual heroics. But as Elle stood in the formation that had gathered in front of the command building, she could feel the weight of attention from what seemed like half the base. Today we recognize the outstanding performance of 3rd Squad during recent combat operations, Colonel Harrington announced, his voice carrying across the assembled personnel. Their tactical excellence and professional competence reflect the highest standards of military service. Elle tried to focus on the words rather than the faces looking back at her. She could see soldiers she'd trained with, officers she'd briefed, support personnel who'd heard stories about the quiet analyst who turned out to be something more than anyone expected. Sergeant First Class Booker, the colonel continued, your leadership and tactical coordination during multiple combat engagements demonstrate the caliber of non-commissioned officers that make this unit effective. Booker stepped forward to receive his commendation, his bearing professional and proud. But when he returned to his position in the formation, he turned slightly toward Elle with a subtle nod of acknowledgement that spoke volumes about how their relationship had evolved. Specialist Marquez, Colonel Harrington called out, your tactical expertise and analytical capabilities have been instrumental in disrupting enemy operations and protecting coalition forces. Your service exemplifies the Army values of excellence and selfless service. Elle stepped forward to accept the Army Commendation Medal, maintaining the military bearing that had become second nature over years of service. But as the colonel pinned the decoration to her uniform, she was thinking about the conversations that had led to this moment, the gradual acceptance, the earned respect, the way her squad had evolved from skeptical observers to trusted teammates. Furthermore, Colonel Harrington continued, I'm pleased to announce that Specialist Marquez has been selected for the Army's new Distributed Operations Advisory Program, where she'll continue to serve with 3rd Squad while providing tactical expertise and training throughout the battalion. The applause that followed was genuine, enthusiastic, and somehow more meaningful than the formal recognition Elle had received during her Special Operations service. This wasn't about media attention or public relations. This was about soldiers acknowledging competence and dedication. As the ceremony concluded and personnel began to disperse, Elle found herself surrounded by members of her squad. Dice was practically vibrating with excitement, Kim wore her characteristic knowing smile, and even the soldiers who'd initially been skeptical offered congratulations that seemed sincere. So, Specialist, Torres said with a grin, or should we say advisor, you gonna start making us do ranger workouts now? Only if you want to, Elle replied, but I might have some suggestions about tactical movement and small unit operations. Actually, Dice interjected, I was hoping you could help me with land navigation. I still get turned around sometimes. And I'd like to learn more about reading terrain, another soldier added, the way you spotted those surveillance signs. Elle realized that what she'd feared most, being singled out, made into something special, had transformed into something entirely different. Instead of becoming a symbol to be admired from a distance, she'd become a resource to be accessed, a teacher to be learned from. We'll set up training schedules, she said. Anyone who wants to improve their tactical skills will work on it together. Booker approached as the crowd began to thin. Marquez, you got a minute? They walked toward the motor pool, away from the lingering attention of the ceremony. When they were alone, Booker stopped and turned to face her. I wanted to say something that I should have said weeks ago. Sergeant, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. Booker's voice carried the weight of someone who'd given this considerable thought. When you arrived here, I judged you based on assumptions. Assumptions about gender, about experience, about what an intelligence analyst could contribute to a combat unit. Elle waited, recognizing that this was important to him. I was wrong, not just about your qualifications, but about what makes a good soldier. I thought leadership had to be loud, obvious, commanding. You showed me that sometimes the best leaders are the ones who lead by example, who serve without seeking recognition. Booker came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute. Specialist Marquez, it's been an honor serving with you. Elle returned the salute, moved by the gesture and the respect it represented. "The honor's been mine, Sergeant." As Booker walked away, Kim appeared at Elle's shoulder. "You know, when I first met you, I knew there was something different. Something that didn't match the official story." "What gave it away?" "The way you moved. The way you observed everything. The way you never seemed intimidated by anything." Kim paused. "But mostly, it was the way you cared about keeping everyone safe. That's not something you can fake." Kim reached into her pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you." Elle unwrapped it to find a Ranger tab patch, the distinctive black and yellow insignia that had been hidden beneath her uniform for months. But this one was different. It was sewn to a backing that would make it clearly visible on her uniform. "Thought it was time you wore this where people could see it," Kim said. Elle studied the patch, thinking about what it represented. For months, she'd hidden this symbol of achievement, training, and dedication. Now Kim was suggesting she display it openly, acknowledging what she was rather than hiding it. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of visibility." "Elle," Kim said, using her first name for the first time, "you're not hiding anymore. Everyone knows what you are. The question is whether you're going to own it or keep pretending it doesn't matter." That evening, Elle sat alone in her quarters, holding the Ranger tab Kim had given her. Through the thin walls, she could hear conversations from the next building. Soldiers discussing the day's ceremony, sharing stories about operations they'd conducted, planning training they wanted to pursue. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Dice standing outside with another soldier she didn't recognize. Young, nervous, with the fresh-faced appearance of someone recently arrived from basic training. "Hey, Specialist," Dice said. "This is Private Wilson. He just got assigned to 3rd Squad, and I was telling him about how things work around here." Elle looked at the new soldier, seeing herself as she'd arrived weeks ago, uncertain, eager to prove herself, carrying assumptions about what military service would require. "Wilson," she said, extending her hand, "welcome to 3rd Squad." "Thank you, ma'am. I mean, Specialist." Wilson's handshake was firm, but his voice carried the nervousness of someone trying to make a good impression. "Dice was telling me about the training opportunities here," Wilson continued. "He said you might be able to help me with tactical skills." Elle glanced at Dice, who was beaming with the pride of someone who'd become a mentor to newer soldiers. "We'll work on whatever you need to improve. All of us will." Quote. After they left, Elle realized that her role at Forward Sentinel had evolved beyond anything she'd originally planned. She wasn't just an intelligence analyst with additional qualifications. She'd become a teacher, a mentor, a resource for soldiers who wanted to be better than they were. She looked again at the Ranger tab Kim had given her, then at her uniform hanging in the wall locker. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new soldiers to train and develop. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Forward Sentinel, Elle felt like she knew exactly who she was supposed to be. 6 weeks later, Elle stood in the same spot where she'd first arrived at Forward Sentinel, waiting for the helicopter that would take her to her next assignment. The morning air carried familiar scents: diesel fuel, dust, and the faint smell of burning trash from the waste disposal area. But the atmosphere felt different now. Changed. Dice approached carrying a small notebook, his expression mixing excitement with the nervousness of new responsibility. "Specialist, I wanted to show you something before you left." He opened the notebook to reveal carefully handwritten notes. Tactical procedures, land navigation techniques, small unit movement principles. Everything Elle had taught him over the past month, organized and documented with the precision of someone who understood its value. "I'm supposed to brief the new intelligence analyst when she arrives next week," Dice explained. "Figured I should have everything written down so I don't forget anything important." Elle smiled, recognizing in Dice's preparation the same dedication to thoroughness that had served her throughout her career. "Looks comprehensive. What's the most important thing you're planning to tell her?" Dice considered the question seriously. "That being smart doesn't make you weak. That analyzing threats is just as important as shooting at them. That everyone has something to contribute if you bother to listen. Good lessons. You taught me that. All of it." Kim appeared around the corner of the building, followed by several other members of 3rd Squad. They gathered around Elle with the easy camaraderie of soldiers who'd served together, fought together, and learned to trust each other completely. "So where are they sending you?" Kim asked. "Fort Bragg, teaching position at the Special Warfare Center." "Teaching what?" "Small unit tactics and leadership development. Apparently someone thinks I might be good at it." Kim laughed. "Someone would be right." Torres handed Elle a folded piece of paper. "This is from all of us. Don't open it until you're on the bird." Elle accepted the paper, touched by the gesture. "You guys didn't need to." "Yeah, we did," Torres interrupted. "You changed how we think about a lot of things. Seemed like we should acknowledge that." Booker emerged from the command building, his usual commanding presence somehow more relaxed than it had been weeks earlier. When he reached the group, he stood at ease rather than attention, a casual posture that reflected how their relationship had evolved. "Marquez," he said, "got time for a final debrief?" They walked toward the helicopter landing zone, where Elle's duffel bag waited beside the marked position where the aircraft would touch down. The base continued its daily rhythm around them, soldiers conducting training, vehicles moving supplies, the constant activity of a military installation operating in a combat zone. "You know," Booker said, "when you first arrived, I thought I knew exactly what we were getting. An intelligence analyst who'd need protection, guidance, maybe some basic tactical training. And instead, I got the best tactical advisor I've ever worked with. Someone who made every soldier in the squad better, safer, more professional." Elle stopped walking and faced him. "Sergeant, they were already good soldiers. I just shared some techniques." "No," Booker said firmly, "you shared leadership. Real leadership. The kind that makes people want to be better than they thought they could be." The sound of rotor blades in the distance indicated that Elle's transportation was approaching. She shouldered her duffel bag and walked toward the landing zone, followed by the members of 3rd Squad who'd come to see her off. As the helicopter settled onto the marked position, Elle turned to address the group one final time. She had to raise her voice over the noise of the aircraft, but her words carried clearly. "Remember what we practiced. Take care of each other. Train hard, fight smart, and never stop learning." She started toward the helicopter, then paused and looked back at Dice. "And Dice? When you're training that new analyst, remember that everyone has potential. Your job is to help them find it." "I will, Specialist, I promise." Elle climbed into the helicopter and found a seat by the window. As the aircraft lifted off, she could see the members of 3rd Squad standing in formation, rendering a collective salute that held more meaning than any ceremony she'd ever attended. From the air, Forward Sentinel looked smaller than it had felt during her time there. Just another temporary installation in a landscape that had seen countless military operations over the centuries. But Elle knew that what had happened there would continue long after the base was dismantled and the soldiers reassigned. She opened the paper Torres had given her, finding a simple message written in multiple handwritings. "To Specialist Marquez, thank you for showing us that strength isn't about proving what you can do. It's about helping others discover what they can do. Your example will be carried forward by every soldier you trained, every lesson you taught, every life you helped protect. You didn't come here to prove anything. You came here to serve. Mission accomplished. 3rd Squad." Elle folded the paper carefully and placed it in her pocket. Through the helicopter window, she could see the Afghan landscape passing below, mountains and valleys that had tested soldiers for generations, terrain that demanded respect, competence, and the kind of quiet professionalism that kept people alive. Her assignment at Forward Sentinel was over, but she knew that what she'd learned there would influence everything that came next. She discovered that leadership didn't require recognition, that influence didn't require rank, and that the best way to serve was often the quietest way. In a few hours, she'd arrive at Fort Bragg to begin teaching the next generation of Special Operations soldiers. They would learn tactics and techniques, procedures and protocols. But more importantly, they would learn that true leadership was about making others better, not making yourself visible. As the helicopter carried her toward her new assignment, Elle reflected on a simple truth that had guided her throughout her career. She hadn't come here to prove anything. She'd come here to serve. And sometimes, service was its own reward. 3 months later, at the Special Warfare Center, Instructor Elle Marquez watched a class of Ranger candidates struggling with a tactical problem during their leadership rotation. The student in charge was making the same mistakes she'd once made, trying to command through volume rather than competence, seeking attention rather than effectiveness. "Private," she called out, What's the most important thing a leader needs to establish with their team? The student considered the question, then answered with the confidence of someone who'd memorized the approved response. Dominance instructor. Establishing clear authority. Elle shook her head. Wrong. The most important thing a leader needs to establish is trust, and trust isn't commanded, it's earned. She thought about Dice, who was probably conducting his own training session at Forward Sentinel. About Kim, who continued to serve as the moral center of Third Squad. About Booker, who'd learned that real leadership sometimes meant stepping back and letting others lead. Leadership, she told the class, isn't about proving you're the strongest person in the room. It's about helping everyone in the room become stronger. Remember that, and you'll never go wrong. As the training exercise resumed, Elle watched young soldiers begin to understand what she'd learned through years of service. That the best leaders were often the ones who led so quietly that others thought they were leading themselves. It was a lesson worth teaching, a legacy worth leaving, a way of serving that proved itself through results rather than recognition. Elle Marquez had found her purpose, not in the spotlight, but in the shadows where real work got done. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.